For thousands of years, elders and knowledge keepers have used stories to educate future generations. Stories and words can help heal our hearts and make Mother Earth a better place for all people. This is Healing Hearts.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Healing Hearts. I'm Tracy Koga. We are so excited to be working together with Immigration Partnership Winnipeg and Knowledge Keeper Clayton Sandy on this unique show that's going to bring together Indigenous and newcomer communities to share their lived experiences and also talk about their diverse perspectives on living here in our city. So now, please join me in welcoming the co-creators for Healing Hearts, Clayton Sandy and Hani Al-Ubeady, Director of Immigration Partnership Winnipeg. This is the big moment. Welcome to Healing Hearts, Hani and Clayton. It's been at least a couple of months of planning, and through the greatness of virtuality, we're here connected, but still apart. So welcome to both of you. And you are the producers of this show. So I'm going to go to Clayton, the knowledge keeper, on what Healing Hearts is all about, and I guess why you and Hani wanted to do a show like this.
First of all, thank you for helping us put this together. And I didn't realize how much work there is involved with this, but it's a lot of back and forth, which is fine. And I think once things work out later on, I'm sure it'll get a lot smoother as we're going along. I guess probably my feeling is about Healing Hearts is that I think it's in 2016 after the Truth and Reconciliation finished their report after 7 years, and the 94 recommendations came out. I was asked to get involved with the project, and from that project, I got to meet a lot of non-Indigenous people from not only Winnipeg but across Canada. And for some reason, I felt that there was some kind of paradigm shift, and it felt to me like that that non-Native people wanted to actually get engaged somehow. And like I've been around for quite a while, and I worked in government for 38 years, and it seemed like it always felt like non-Native people wanted to get involved but didn't know how to or were scared to. And the only time that that non-Native people really got active, especially working with me, is when they got to know me. And when they got to know me just as Clayton, not as the Indigenous, not as a Native or Indian, what they used to call back in the day. So they got to know me as Clayton, as their friend. And then after that, they started asking me just simple questions. And I used to ask them later on, how come you guys were afraid to ask me these questions? And they used to say, well, we're afraid to offend you. We're afraid that you might get mad at us, or you might do something. And I said, well, I don't bite, and yeah, I'm very open-minded. So that was the response I got many times. But when we started working after the 94 calls to action came out, I found that people seemed to be sincere, and they actually wanted to. It felt like they wanted to roll up their sleeves and not just provide money or verbal support. They wanted to actually get active. And so I was on that journey for about 4 years, and I was quite surprised how many people I met across Canada. Probably maybe a couple of thousand for sure, and people that I become good friends with. And that's what I think I've always wanted people to get to know me just for who I am. And I remember one time I was doing a workshop in government, and I had a group of what, maybe 30 non-Native people. It was a cross-cultural course, and some guy asked a question. He said, that this last couple of days, we talked about the Indian Act. We talked about Native people, we talked about Indian people, Native people, Indigenous people, Aboriginal people. What am I supposed to call you? He says, eh? And I said, why don't you call me Clayton? I said, and everybody had a good laugh, and it just seemed like that kind of just sort of brought the tone down, and it's like me, asking you, like, are you Scottish or Irish or German or whatever? I said, am I supposed to, like, call you, whatever, like that? And I said, what's wrong with just using people's first names? I said, and so he kind of, yeah, he had a good he had a, he accepted that, but it just seemed like, um there's just so much information out there, and so much information about, I guess, maybe even the truth. And so I think it's time that we start talking the truth. And I find that excuse me, we're going through a cycle right now of the truth and reconciliation. I think the reconciliation part is going really well. To me, I find sometimes the truth part still isn't there yet. And I wouldn't mind to get to that at some point, where people just aren't afraid to talk about the truth. And the truth really, really hurts. And I think with anybody, any human being on this planet, um, we've heard the term off and on, by the truth hurts, and it can be about whatever, and it could be about secrets, it could be something in your family, and a lot of people don't want to deal with the truth sometimes. And then when it comes to Indigenous issues, because there's so much negativity out there, people just aren't afraid to ask those tough questions and deal with the truth. So I'm hoping Healing Hearts will be a program where people will speak from the heart, and people will realize and understand that that's part of what, that's all we want. We want to deal with the truth. We're tired of dealing with bureaucracy. We're tired of dealing with unknowns. We're tired of dealing with myths about our people. We're tired about a number of different things, but why don't we just sit down and become friends and talk about the truth? And the truth will hurt at times, but I think once we get beyond that, we could probably do a lot of more work together. I've
Uh,
always told people, in the past, maybe 4 or 5 years, that the last census that was done in Winnipeg, and it said that Winnipeg has 94,000 Indigenous people living within the perimeter. And I've done a lot of work with this, with some of the drop-in places on Main Street, like Main Street Project, especially Salvation Army. But when I've looked at their annual reports and looked at the numbers, it seemed like the numbers for the Indigenous people that were utilizing services, are utilizing shelters. It seemed like it was only like around 2,000. So if we only have like maybe 2,000, or yeah, around 2,000 of our people using the shelters, or being observed on Main Street or Portage Avenue, where's the other 90,000 Indigenous people in Winnipeg? And people never ask about that. They always concentrate on what they see on Main Street or in the newspaper or on TV, and that's always the worst of the worst all the time. So I wish people would realize that again, that Winnipeg is known as the largest reserve in Canada. It's always been known that because of our population. So I wish people would start asking questions about the professional people. Like, I've been in Winnipeg 45 years now, and I'm always proud when I've traveled to the national level to say that, I love Winnipeg, and I love living here because there's so many Indigenous people. I can go anywhere in Winnipeg and I can probably run into an Indigenous person, and it makes me feel good like that. And then also too, our people are all over the place. Like, we live in every part of Winnipeg, and a lot of people don't know that. And so those are the kind of things that I think that Healing Hearts would be about. And I know that um, a lot of the non-native people that I've worked with over the last maybe 15, 20 years have really became aware of the real issues that have happened to our people, the real history, the real cycles, the issues around residential schools, the Indian Act, you name it, and especially the policies. Most people have no concept about the policies that Indigenous people live under in Canada, and it's been like that way for over 150 years. So I'm hoping that Healing Hearts can be about sharing that kind of history and getting people to ask questions and getting people to become allies with us, because we want to be allies with anybody. And I've always been open and to work with anybody. And I remember, I think when I was just a young boy, I heard that there's a quote saying, "Do unto others as you would have them do unto you," and that always stuck with me for some reason. And I think I've always lived my life like that. If people want to work with me or people want to be friends with me, I'll be friends with anybody. But if you don't want to be friends with me, that's fine also too. But I just find that it's better to, I don't know, it's always been better just to try and get along with people rather than try not to, because we know where that leads to all the time. So I think that's part of it. So I'm hoping Healing Hearts can be a program where people aren't afraid to call in, or people aren't afraid to write in, or people to ask questions. And I'm hoping to have all kinds of exciting topics over the next year, and to get people to a point where they can actually start asking their neighbors or start asking questions about anything. And I find that in my time in government, there's a lot of myths about Indigenous people, and especially in some of the offices I worked in, and people never took the time to ask about those myths, if they're true or not, and because they're scared to ask me. So I'm hoping that people aren't afraid to ask us questions. And Winnipeg, I always say, has probably the best role models in Canada. And I find that we probably have the smartest Indigenous people in Canada. And I've gotten flack saying that in different provinces, but I just think that it's true. Anyways, but yeah, so I'm hoping that the Healing Heart can open up some minds and some hearts, and to start getting people knowing about us, and not being afraid of us, and not being afraid to ask us questions. And of course, everything we're doing is talking about, we're saying words, and I've always known that words can be used so terrible amongst each other. And I think all of us have been probably lied to at one time in our lives. We've probably been called down one time in our life. We've probably been in terrible, working or business relationships or personal relationships, and we know how words hurt. So I'm hoping by using good words and kind words that people can start changing that, and start looking at the way we communicate. So that's what Healing Heart is all about to me. So I'm hoping that with myself and Hani as a colleague and a friend, that we can actually start getting the word out. So the next generations, like my kids and my grandkids, don't have to worry about the issues that are so negative all the time. So that's what Healing Hearts is about to me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Clayton. And I know that this project is so close and dear to your heart. So I'm now going to talk to Hani. Hani, first and foremost, let's talk about the Immigration Partnership Winnipeg, the organization that you're director of. Tell us more on what this organization does and how it has really grown, especially since COVID, since this pandemic and isolation, for newcomers and immigrants in our city.
Good afternoon, Tracy and Clayton. And yeah, I share the same excitement that we started the show. And I think the way that we went about it, trying to get the show going, based on the projects that my organization is engaged in and tackling as we speak. And we will get to that in a few moments. But I just want to say that the analogy of getting back and forth, trying to get this show going, is very much it's a similar process when you want to build relationship through reconciliation efforts, or just relationship with anyone in the society. It's a back and forth. It's reaching out, and you're being reached by others, and so on and so forth. And that's really what we're trying to achieve here, is just establish the process, the space for relationships to be built, and then the healing heart in itself. It's just part of that process. It's going to happen for different individuals at different steps on that path. So it depends on where we are and where we're at in terms of reconciliation or relationship building. As a newcomer, as an immigrant myself, before talking as a director of an organization or managing a project, I'm an individual, I'm a human being, and I think we can connect on that level. We can connect and build relationships at the level of being human, being a person, an individual, a family member. And I think we all share the pain of exclusion or discrimination or being marginalized. And I think every individual, once subjugated to these type of things, would feel the pain and the hurt. And I think the least we can do as newcomers or immigrants or new Canadians is it's to at least understand. First, we need to create the space to understand what our Indigenous communities in whether it's in Manitoba or in Canada have gone through in terms of history, in terms of policies related to their lives and so on and so forth. We need to understand that. We need to learn more so we can build those relationships based on knowledge, not on myths and stereotypes or misinformation. And I think and now I can take a second or two to introduce myself as a director. I thought I will start as a human being because that's the basis of the premises of our show here. It's healing heart. It's it's a world that uh, uh, like it has to. You have to feel the information before you understand it. Then you would be able to connect with people. But if we keep it at an intellectual level, it may get forgotten or put aside once the show is over. And so for that reason, I started with the conversation at a human level. But if I now talk as a professional, I would say so as a director of Immigration Partnership Winnipeg, which is an organization that is mandated to identify gaps and barriers in the settlement and the integration processes for newcomers here in Winnipeg. And our job is to collectively engage stakeholders and key partners to tackle those barriers and gaps through community-based solutions. And I think one of the areas or the gaps that we identified is the gap that existed between newcomers and Indigenous communities in Winnipeg. And this gap that existed really just because lack of orientation, lack of proper information, and lots of stereotypes and myths around Indigenous population and Indigenous peoples and cultures in Winnipeg. So newcomers build and create their opinions based on these type of premises, and that led to that gap. And so our job is to really to bridge that gap and find out what contributed to it. And for that purpose, we have engaged the community in finding solution to bridge that gap. And one of the tools that we are trying to create to tackle this problem is to create a space for proper information, Indigenous-led orientation to be provided to newcomers upon arrivals so they get educated and oriented on Indigenous cultures and traditions. We put an end to this vicious cycle of misunderstanding. And so that gap would not exist. And so that Indigenous orientation toolkit as a project, there are a number of themes that hopefully we will have a chance through this show or the coming shows to base our conversations on, and also to have the chance to explore them and allow other people in the city and the province to know about what we're doing and why we're doing it, and use them as a trigger for wider and bigger conversation that contribute to the process of reconciliation. And so our organization is as an indirect client service organization dealing with policies and programs related to settlement integration processes, as I said. However, we cannot complete our job by creating a welcome and inclusive society without being able to identify this gap that exists between the two communities and offer some community-based solution and move on with solution that bring the communities together and allowing the larger society to learn from this experience. And so I am very hopeful that we will engage wider audience in this conversation. And as Clayton mentioned, people who are either hesitant to ask difficult questions or not knowing how to ask the questions, I really truly welcome them to try at least identify those areas of concerns or areas that need to be highlighted, and we will do our best from our perspective as indirect service providers, but also as a human beings, as a newcomers, as whatever you want to call it, residents of this city, residents of this country, citizens of this country, to answer those concerns, questions from the heart. So do not expect philosophical, intellectual answers to those, even though we're capable of providing those type of answers, but we would want to engage from the heart to the heart. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Hani. And yes, people are watching this live on Facebook, and we are encouraging everyone to use the chat room and to ask your questions, and to also invite guests to welcome on the show to ask questions to our guests. I'm going to throw it now to Clayton. Just to wrap things up briefly, Clayton and Hani, a big part of the show is sharing your lived experience. And I know I learn so much when someone shares their story. This is going to be a place where people can share their stories. So Clayton, briefly, if you want to share your own lived experience in hopes that it might open doors for others to come forward.
Great, thank you very much. Thank you, Hani, also too. Yeah, I think that like I said, I've lived in Winnipeg 45 years now, and I've worked in government for 38 years. But I found that probably the last maybe 25 years when I finally felt comfortable in government to start sharing who I am or who I was when a time that I felt that it changed me in a way where basically I started to feel comfortable about who I am and what I had to contribute. But the difficult part on that journey was that to deal with the issues that I had lived when as a young boy. You know, both of my parents are residential school survivors. 6 of my siblings are, and some of us were part of the 60s school. And I've lived off reserve all my life, and we lived either on army bases or we lived mostly in Brandon. But racism was bad all the way growing up, and I'm always kind of surprised, and a lot of my close friends are surprised how I've gotten over that, and how I've gotten over being treated like dirt most of my life, and being called down, and how I can still reach out to people and try to become friends. But I find that if I didn't deal with that issue, and that issue is basically inside here, and if you don't deal with that issue inside here, it stays inside here, and it can eat you up, and it can actually it can probably put you in an early grave. So I've witnessed many of my Indigenous friends and relatives and all that do that, because they just didn't have the knowledge and the wherewithal to start dealing with those really hurtful issues. But I find if we don't do that, nothing changes. So that's basically what I think part of my life. And I didn't want to I guess relay that negative stuff I grew up with my kids, and also with my grandchildren. I wanted them to have a chance. I didn't want them growing up with alcoholism and violence, and so I had an opportunity to stand in my truth and deal with that stuff, and that's what I did. And I found that it made a big difference in my whole family.
Wow. Well, again, the conversation is going to continue with you, Hani. For you, share a personal experience?
Well, I'm as a former refugee and leaving my birthplace when I was a teenager, basically, and that's in itself it's a long story. However, it allows me to see things from I humanize the relationship with others through my lived experiences, and looking back and learning from the uh, the difficulties that I went through, and I assume those difficulties are being shared by some of our probably listeners, and also the people who are coming from the indigenous community. So I think we can learn so much from each other once um, we open the door for that exchange of lived experiences and share the commonalities in many different areas in our lives. So I'm very happy to learn from others in the show and from the people who listen or would listen to the show.
Well, I want to thank both of you, Clayton and Hani. I am so excited to embark on this great journey. I am wide open and accepting and wanting to learn so much more from everyone. So thank you. And next, we're going to open it up for questions. Welcome back to Healing Hearts, and this is the fun part. It is the Q&A questions to our guests. Welcome, everybody. And I want to give a big welcome to Shireen Donato. Give a wave, Shireen. With all of this craziness, I know it's this virtuality. Very nice to have you. Shireen Donato, she represents Mosaic, and she's the Director of Family Programs. And once again, welcome back, Hani and Clayton. Thank you so much for that great conversation. It's really setting the tone. And I believe Jamie is joining us. And we have some other people in the conversation too as well. So welcome everybody. Now you might be muted, so please unmute yourselves so we can hear your voices, your lovely voices.
So can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, good. Okay, thanks.
So I guess I'll start off by talking with Shireen, because Shireen, you're going to bring a new perspective or a different perspective to what this program will be. There's Jamie. Welcome, Jamie. So Shireen, first of all, tell us a little bit about your background and what you do here in the city.
Sure, thanks, Tracy. I'm really happy to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me. Really honored. So I work in settlement. I've been in the settlement sector for over 20 years. I don't want to date myself, but I come from an immigrant family, of course, and I've worked at numerous organizations. Most recently, I'm working at Mosaic, Newcomer Family Resource Network. Yeah.
So you get to see an awful lot of people coming in through your doors. I wanted to ask you, I guess, Shireen, too, what are some of the things that the newcomers are really looking for? I mean, obviously they're coming to a new city for a new way of life, but I guess let's start with some of the hardships and some of the things that they really need as basic needs.
So I think that's a great question, because when people talk about settlement and the services that we provide, we do focus on those basic immediate needs. Settlement means a roof over your head and your kids in school and daycares and so on. I feel that in settlement, we have this unique role as the people that welcome newcomers, because a big part of our job is also about integration and understanding this new society and milieu that you live in. And I feel like that piece of settlement, again, we play a really unique role. It's an amazing opportunity for us to start talking about Indigenous peoples, about the first peoples of the land, about whose land we're on. And I found in my work that newcomers uniformly are really interested in land, and they very much understand the connection to a place, the idea of belonging, and of displacement. And so there's so many important conversations that we have to have at the front end of that settlement journey. So it is those practical things that need to happen, but also because I think our society is actually redefining as we move along what it means to be Canadian. You know, I think settlement used to be very cookie cutter, Canadian, white, mainstream kind of ideas of what Canada is. That is being redefined, and as settlement workers, we have to be in on that and make sure that we're talking about the full of Canadian society, which is Indigenous peoples and settlers and the rest of us.
It's so true. I want to go to another guest here on the panel. Ramola, could you give a wave? Nice to meet you. And I know that you have a question here. Do you want to ask that question, Ramola?
Well, pleasure to meet you, and a pleasure to see Clayton here again, and Hani, who I just met a little while ago. And Shireen, thanks for your comments, and hi, Jamie. I think it's a wonderful initiative, this effort to join people really at the level of heartfelt connection. It's, you know, as a longtime immigrant to Canada, I feel that the bridging between Indigenous peoples and the so-called visible minority community has been extremely strained over the years. And I think a lot of government programs have contributed to misunderstandings and misalignment of trust. And so I think what you are doing today is like really a great goodwill gesture of trust and relationship building, where we realize our commonalities. And of course, as you've already said, it is so critically important for all of us to acknowledge that we're on the lands of the first peoples of this continent, and then to take our rightful places with them. And of course, I think this could be inspirational for the earlier settlers as well, because some of them have had a hard time understanding that. And perhaps, Shireen, you said that in the context of perhaps newer immigrants are conscious of our loss of land and our loss of rootedness. And yeah, I think Indigenous peoples can offer us a way of feeling grounded again in our new spaces. Yeah, thank you.
No, well, thank you. We're going to get you back in the conversation. Hani, there's a question here. What do you think newcomers and Indigenous communities share as common experiences? Can you share about the first time that you went to a reserve with the staff from Welcome Place? And I mean, beyond racism and discrimination, the strengths in your approaches to build a better world.
Good evening, everyone, and very good to see all familiar faces. I feel at home, and I feel this is it put things into perspective. Speaking from the heart, and our show is it's healing hearts, and I feel like I am in the right place. And so I thought to start with these few words, and also I am very glad that this idea turned into an actual work and brought people together. And I'm hoping that this would grow to include people who have questions related to further curiosity, whether it's related to specific experiences that related to their own life, or through their work, or someone just threw a word or two through a random conversation, and we keep the momentum going. With respect to the question, and I salute the person who asked this question, that took me back a few years, and I think specifically it's around 2007. So I was younger and sharper probably then, and I was more curious, but less knowledgeable for sure about Indigenous cultures and traditions and so on and so forth. And I guess it's a journey that got enriched throughout the process of curiosity and positive curiosity without assumptions or negative stereotypical based type of information. So my experience of being a former refugee myself, curious to know what the gap was all about between the indigenous and the newcomer communities. And I was curious, but also I was driven by one simple fact that I think when we were told of information about what the gap is all about, it's not necessarily based on truthful foundation. It could be something based on misinformation, stereotypes, or just lack of positive curiosity to reach to the other person. And that's what we're trying to do here, is basically reaching out to the other person, humanize the connection, and just flow naturally and speak from the heart and leave your judgment, park your judgment to the side, and just allow yourself to flow with that positive curiosity. So that was my motivation. And I actually, it was a journey. The experience was incredibly powerful. It was transformative in terms of change. And it's not necessarily for me only. We took two people who were newcomers or newcomers or new residents in Winnipeg, and we went to a place called Reserve, and we didn't know what the reserves were. I read about them, but I never been on a reserve before. Anyway, so from point A to point B, which is A is central area in downtown Central Park, all the way to the reserve or one of the reserves in Manitoba, and the journey it was full of curiosity, lots of questions, and raw and authentic questions. May not come as politically correct questions, but they were authentic, and we were patient enough to create a space for those questions to exist, and we went with the flow. And so we got to the reserve. We started with negative, stereotypical type of questions and observations from both of those two newcomers. Halfway through the journey, those negative, stereotypical type of questions shifted to more sympathetic, half judgmental. And then by the time we reached the reserve, we spent the day, and on our way back, of course, there's lots of details in between, but I don't have the time to go through the story. There's interaction with residents, with the local from the reserves, and so on and so forth. Looking at the condition in which people live on the reserve, that created that further questions in the heads of those two people. Coming back, stopping at the relics of one of the residential schools, asking more curious questions. By the time we reached downtown, those two people completely transformed from negatively saturated views and opinions to very empathic and sympathetic, and also people who are motivated to do something with this relationship building type of work. And one of them now actually championed work that related to the ethnocultural communities and Indigenous people. So it is an incredibly powerful experience. And I think I'm inspired by those little experiences, but big in essence. And we're trying to create that space here and move on, and hopefully more to join us in this positive curiosity.
Oh, well, thank you so much, Hani. We do have another question, and I probably will give this to Clayton. Do you think perspectives about Indigenous people have been changing recently, and how so?
Well, thank you. Good question. Yeah, I guess probably in my journey, which is many years ago, the perspective was pretty terrible, pretty racist. But I find over the past maybe 20, 25 years, things have changed drastically for me, especially for my kids and for young people that I work with and colleagues. I find once you let your guard down on both sides, and take the blinders off, things change and people would realize how similar we are. And like I have the same dreams for my children as anybody else, and for my grandchildren, and and we all work hard, and sometimes our community don't have the opportunity to work hard sometimes. So those are the kind of things that are missing sometimes. But I think it's just important just to let your guard down and ask simple questions, and you'll get straight answers. So things have changed. Thank you.
Oh, well, that kind of spills in. Now, this is going to go out to all of the panel here. This is a good one. What do you do personally to reach out to others to learn about their culture? And that's a great question, the icebreaker. And I usually get, so where are you from? And I say, I'm from St. Vital. I'm from Winnipeg. No, no, no. Where are you from? So, yeah, Shireen, she's got a smile on her face.
Yeah, I think just the name of this series, speaking from the heart. I really, and what Clayton, you were just saying, I mean, we all have the same goals for our children and for our families and in our lives. So to be honest, and I also teach in social work, and students sometimes say, like, how do I talk to newcomers in that case, right? And how do I, yeah, you have to have the courage. You have to lay yourself bare. You have to be vulnerable, but you have to also see that they're a person just like you are a person. And so you just start talking about hobbies and interests and children and language, and what's your first name mean, or your middle name mean, or and you just start building common ground. And actually, when I was at one of the agencies I worked at, IRCOM, we sort of were able to work with folks in the community and developed a project called Common Ground, because I think that's the essence of it, right? We have to see the humanity in each other, and then, like LPW and Clayton, like, provide these opportunities to bring people together. But you just have to put yourself out there. So sorry to all those introverts, but you just put yourself out there a little bit, be honest and straight up, and not be afraid to make mistakes. That's part of it too.
How about you, Romola?
Oh, well, I coordinate the Circle of All Nations. We say the Circle of All Nations, a culture of peace. And I describe it as the legacy heritage of Algonquin, late Algonquin elder William Commanda, who built bridges in his relationship with people over the, well nigh 100 years of his life. So he used this word, Jinawe Daganuk. We're all interconnected, we're all interrelated. And he wanted to help people realize that we were as much interconnected with each other as we were with the land we are now inhabiting, his Mother Earth. And so he built relationality on those double levels. He was truly a historian and an activist over many, many decades, and fully aware of how oppressed Indigenous peoples were and had been in their own home grounds. And more than that, also super concerned about how abused his land was, how the water was being polluted, how the air was being polluted and things like that, animals being decimated. And he was passionately upset about that. And he felt he needed to link up people with each other so that we could all take common responsibility for each other and for Mother Earth. And so out of that came this whole idea of a circle of all nations, where then we all have our individual voices and differences, and at the same time, look for where we fit in this pattern. So it's interesting when you say, well, when the question comes, well, where are you from? I mean, I like to say, I'm from South Africa, because it adds a kind of weird thing to my identity. So I'm from South Africa, but I'm not African. And I'm Indian, but in Canada, I'm not a Native American Indian. And William Commander liked to say, well, Indian, no, I'm not American. And so the whole question of identity becomes quite intriguing.
Mhm.
And it's rich for me to realize I'm from South Africa. It's also important for me to realize I'm, um, Indian. When I sat here with William Commander many years ago, and the Chinese people were celebrating 50 years since they'd received the vote in what used to be a rather racist Canada, I couldn't help feeling, as an immigrant, happy that the Chinese people were finally being recognized, because Canada is built on the bones of Chinese people. But I also felt rather ashamed because William Commander at that time wasn't having access to saying whatever he wanted to see happen in his country happen. So, we've got a mixed heritage here that we have to work very hard to heal. And I think, like, yeah, it's great that you guys are taking this initiative to air the discussions. And then so this in a small way with my circle work is how I try to do the bridging and the sharing. And because I'm, of course, advocating in part because of William Commander, I tend to become, like, a bit activist in my tone. I don't always mean to do that, but it is kind of like a bit of a responsibility, particularly because I come from working in the criminal justice system. And even though Clayton seems to see improvement in the relationships, with Indigenous peoples, by and large, I think Indigenous people are not occupying their rightful place in this land, and they're dealing with a hell of a lot of isolation and racism. And so while there are definitely the strong and powerful and inspirational voices, there's a lot of struggle too. So we got to change that.
Well, and hopefully we can start it here. You know what? And I do have another question, I believe, from for Hani from Joe Thompson. I guess I can say names too as well. Does anybody have anything to add? Because it was directed to the whole panel. Nothing from you, Clayton? Yeah.
Yeah, I think mine was a bit different because I like to eat. So a lot of the immigrant people that I met, now I like Filipino food, East Indian food, Chinese food. I like all kinds of food. So that was a big part of my journey, was enjoying the food, and the food always brings people together in a really good way. Thanks.
Yes, no doubt. So Hani, this one's for you. Why is it so important to be a leader and partner with our community, personally and professionally?
So, big hi to Joe. I mean, and this is a great question. I love Joe, obviously, and he's a great guy. So on a personal level, I guess it goes back to the very same title of the show, is speaking from the heart healing and all of that. As a person, I would not be truthful to myself if I don't understand my position in the society authentically. And authentically means I have to connect with my own self, and myself drives me to be a pure human, where I connect with those who struggle to be recognized as human beings. So that will drive me naturally to the people who are marginalized and saying, look, you bigger society, we exist, we have needs, we have things that we want to be recognized for. We need to be given a space to exist, to flourish, to cherish our values, our culture, and so on and so forth. So that's in terms of personal value. I have a personal value that drives me to connect, whether with Indigenous people, because it is the subject of today, or with any human being. And that's because that's a very humanistic type of value system that I adhere to. So that's number one on a personal level. In terms of being a leader and do the work that we do on a professional level, I think there's no divorce in point here in between the two. If you do not have a good value system that fuel your life and charge up your energy to go out into the world and look into ways to connect with others based on your own value system, you would not succeed in your own professional role. Because if you are all about fancy agendas and secure and funding to look good, and you forget the ingredient number one in this whole recipe, and that is goes back to the self. It goes back to the value system as an individual. Even you're as very the smartest professional, you may succeed in achieving one project, but you would not achieve the larger picture, and that is connecting with the larger audience that you're trying to connect with. In this case, if it's a group of people, or it's a community, or a society like ours, we would not succeed for the long run. You may succeed just within the duration of your project, but after that, you would have to ask yourself, now what? So I think I'm connected to the things that I do is based on a value system that I adhere to. That's basically why.
Wow. Well, thank you, Hani. I have a question actually for all of you, and we have a clock going here. We have 5 minutes left, but we can go over because it's kind of like the elephant in the room that's kind of silent, and it's COVID. It's the pandemic, and we're now almost nearing a year. And the future, although the vaccine is out and people are getting vaccinated, it is still an issue. So to all the panel, how have you, I guess, coped through all of this, the isolation, not being able to see maybe your loved ones or at least friends? And moving forward, is this going to polarize certain communities, which it already sort of has too as well? And how are we going to bridge that? As they all say, we're all in this together, but as we all know through this journey, we really aren't. And I know, Hani, you just spoke, but maybe from you, from a personal experience with COVID.
Mm. Yeah. So thank you for asking this question again. COVID is, we intend to forget when we get into discussion or conversation, we intend to forget the fact that we live in pandemic. Is very isolating. It is very difficult and trying times, especially for those who come from collective societies, cultures. Social capital is a huge thing in our lives. Socializing it's the driving force to keep our mental health and the well-being going in a healthy manner. And if that's taken away from you, it's a gap. We're talking about bridging gap. This is one personal gap that exists. It needs to be looked after, and not everyone can bridge those gaps in these situations, in this specific situation that we're speaking about. So from personal experience, I can share that I actually went through COVID. I was tested positive. I was struggling for over a month. It was one of those very critical experiences in my life, and it was near death type of experience. And the only thing I know is little messages that come through my mobile phone to give me that little glimpse of what I refer to in terms of social capital and social network and so on and so forth. That gave me a positive energy to battle the virus. And I came out of it. And I really truly appreciate the people that were there for me in terms of little messages popping up in my phone. As I said, with whatever energy left with me, I still reach out to the phone and look from time to time to see who thought of me and who said what, and to give me that energy. And sure enough, messages kept coming. Sometimes it took me a day or two to get back to them, and sometimes it took me longer. But still, it meant a lot. So what is that telling us? That's telling us exactly, bring us again to full circle. Goes back to the very same essence and the purpose of the show. We're trying to reach to one another, but it has to come from the heart. And the reason is COVID taught me one thing, and probably, hopefully, it's helpful to others in terms of when you become vulnerable and in a weak position, you forget about all other things in life except for what matters, except for the fundamental things in your life. And you connect with the people that understand these type of things.
Yeah.
And the only healing part, the only healing component in this journey is when you connect with people that understand these type of things. And then that's where the positive energy comes in. And so we're trying to build exactly the same thing here by creating a conversation, connecting with the people based on these fundamentals. And once we connect, I'm very sure our circle will widen and become bigger and bigger. So yes, COVID it's big and huge in terms of impact, but I think there are lots of lessons to learn from COVID.
Well, thank
Yeah.
you. And I'm going to go to Clayton. Clayton, because the Indigenous community has been hit very hard, and part in case because of the living conditions and everything like that. I mean, how is the community coming back and fighting back? It has been a tough road.
Well, I guess maybe I'll just share just something that happened in my community, Sioux Valley, Dakota First Nation. About maybe 3 months ago, it made me had mixed feelings. Sioux Valley was one of the reserves that was having a lot of suicides, or young people were committing suicides, and the community reached out to the federal and provincial government for support, and it really made me think about what what could I do, and could I make a difference. And of course the reserve was locked down, but when the phone calls I'd make back and the texts I'd make back to the reserve was that the young people were tired of not doing anything, not being able to go to sweat lodges or powwows or visit each other, and then of course drugs and alcohol got involved. And then so we're getting out of it now. I think that the cases have really come down quite a bit in my community, and we're slowly moving forward in life, and we're I think they're doing a lot more with trying to get young people more active. And that was the thing, that if we don't get active, we just wound up doing nothing. What is done for me was that it's taught me how to write more. So I have a book there, and I've been doing a lot of journaling, and it's something that I hadn't been doing much in the past. But over the last year, I filled up 2 books already just on different things that I've done, and dreams and stories and stuff like that. So it's helped me journal. And it's also too, I'm really good at Zoom now, and Blue Jeans and Skyping, and so
Okay, Clayton. Obviously, you've thrived through all of this. I'm going to go to Shireen. Maybe taking kind of the perspective from newcomers. I can't imagine coming to Winnipeg and so thrilled and excited and full of energy because I'm going to start a new life, and then boom, everything's a lockdown and you have nobody, nothing. It has to be quite a shock for newcomers during this pandemic.
Yeah, that's it. When in March of 2020, I was working at IRCOM, which is residential housing for those very brand new to Canada. So what happened was some families had just moved in and everything was shutting down around them. As all the borders were closing, a few families arrived into a complete chaotic environment, in that, okay, they had housing, which is good, but we were trying to get into how much do we do virtually? We still have to do some things in person. We were so frightened of the pandemic, and we were adapting our programming and so on so they could get the supports they needed, but there was so much so much added stress. And there was a lot of disconnection of families because so some people were just expecting their uncle, their father, their mother to arrive. The resettlement process was just reunification process, and then the borders shut down. So there was all of that hardship, and then being in this land of lots of promise and yet so many difficulties to just finding out what's happening and where to get information and so on. I think the settlement sector did a decent job of turning things quickly around and helping connect families. The thing I learned from families, most of the families at IRCOM are refugee families, is resilience. So in fact, many of the lessons I learned came from those families, because boy, did they know how to deal with a lockdown, how to deal with a crisis, how to understand when the streets are empty, what to do. One might have thought that the children would be bouncing around the hallways as they normally are in joyful times. Honestly, everyone had their kids in. They really knew about this idea. For better or for worse, they knew how to keep families safe. So I would say I learned a lot about resilience and endurance and thriving in difficult times. And I think for myself, I just had an experience where my partner had to go to hospital for emergency surgery 2 weeks ago. And, sometimes, especially those of us with some pandemic privilege, we can carry on. I still have a job and so on. And then we couldn't find out what had happened to him. Not the hospital's fault. They're pretty busy with COVID. And in the end, I never was able to get through to hospital staff. So everything that came to us was from him being able to text us. I'm okay, waiting for surgery, going in tomorrow. Nope, canceled, going into next day. I'm out, I'm okay. So it really, I could really understand how incredibly difficult this must be in the hospital. And again, this is just a little taste of, what Hani was experiencing and many, many others, whether it's COVID or whether you're needing urgent care. So I think just to say that it's this pressure that we kind of don't always tune into. And then I would say there are families living with that level of pressure all the time. And so, I think that's all I would say about COVID. Thank you.
Oh no, there's so many people out there. And Romola, for you, words of wisdom from someone that has been and lived, and we're all thinking this is doomsday, but it clearly can't be.
Yeah, it isn't from my perspective, but it is in some respects. I do also think that. I'll say at the offset, since I used to be very much an operational kind of person, a worker, I have felt guilty that I haven't had a role to play in responding to the emergencies, because coming from prisons, you're always responding to emergencies. But then, separate from all of that, this has actually served me very well. I'll say, somebody from England actually asked me to work with them on some paper about COVID and isolation, and I did a little abstract, but it didn't suit them at all. But actually, the abstract obliged me to write a paper, and I did in May. And I called it Coronavirus and Isolation. And it's up on our website. And actually just yesterday, somebody else provoked me to look at it again. And I realized how much the COVID crisis has followed the lines of the prophecies of Indigenous peoples and others, but particularly William Commander's prophecy. And that is really partly what I focused on in that paper. But the isolation then meant we got to generate community through technology. And we had to learn then how to connect. And so Facebook, now William Commander was on Facebook before he died. So we have always called him the .com elder. So we've had a presence on Facebook since its inception. So we had, many friends there. And when we started with the help of some of our students teaching old people like me how to use Facebook technology and live videos and all of those kind of scary things, we gradually hosted meetings and we gradually started to share our story and draw together people from all over the world who'd been a part of the work and part of the effort. So it gave me like a new place to actually do what William Commander used to do. He used to hold gatherings at his home and invite anybody, and people from all over the world used to come and camp out there year after year. With our Facebook Lives, we were able to do like free online gatherings for whoever might be interested. So we kept a certain theme of our work going. And then Clayton participated just like last week, a couple of weeks ago, in a session where really we had people who were just like hopping in wanting to chat because people want to create that community. So, COVID has released that opportunity, as much as probably there are a lot of negative things as well. But we're focusing on where the technology, the communication, and the social values can all interlink to help move us forward. But of course, it means you got to be awake all the time. So for Christmas, I had to get up so early in order to talk to my family in South Africa, in order to talk to nieces and nephews in China, in order to talk to another niece and her family in Australia. So, but when will I see them again?
Oh,
Yeah.
Ramola. Oh, you know what? And Jamie, I've got to go to you. I'm sorry. I mean, I know that you're monitoring the Facebook and questions and everything like that. And she does work for IPW with Hani. And you were part and parcel of all of this, getting this together. So no, I mean, anytime you want to jump in, but you've been at the get-go of this. And, let's talk about maybe your thoughts and feelings up tonight as we close this. And moving forward with all of these different stories and messages, it's very inspiring. And from the comments too, it's been great.
Yeah, thank you, Tracy. I've just been keeping an eye on the Facebook throughout this whole thing and making sure that we have everything sorted through. You're doing great with making sure that all of the questions are answered. I guess just the one thing that I would want to say is that I'm really happy with how this has turned out and everyone sharing your wonderful opinions and stories. And I think it's a really positive step towards the future. If I were to comment on COVID and just everything that's been happening over the past year, I guess what I would say is that it's been very strange, and that there's been so many difficulties for so many different communities, and the isolation and being scary and everything changing and all of the struggles of trying to figure out how we can adapt. But there's also been some amazingly positive things that have been happening that I've seen, like new initiatives that have risen up in order to support communities, new connections that are being made, mostly digitally, but new connections that are being made where people are wanting to get to know each other better and wanting to have that personal, person-to-person human contact. It's really helped a lot of people to appreciate other people and what we do and learn and know from being in contact with each other. And it's really raised a lot of awareness about mental health, and it's almost in a lot of ways made it okay for people to be able to say, I'm not okay and I need help and I need to talk to somebody and I need to just feel a connection with somebody. And that's, yeah, I think out of all of the terrible things that have been happening, that there's been a lot of wonderful things too. And it's just, it's interesting how the world tries to balance no matter what is happening.
Well, thank you so much, Jamie. Yes, mental health is so, so important, and that will all bring us together too as well. But I want to wrap things up by thanking all of you, Hani, Clayton, Shireen, Ramola, Jamie, for joining us on our very first episode. I am very excited to continue on this journey. I invite all of you to join us on March 10th when we'll have Dennis Whitebird and Dr. Art Mickey as speakers, and again, an engaging conversation. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you to Immigration Partnership Winnipeg and Knowledge Keeper Clayton Sandy. It's been an honor, and we will see you next time on Healing Hearts.